I'm making a pumpkin pie pudding. I'm starting with a softened banana here in a bowl, mashing it with a fork. You look for a really ripe one, you know, let it sit on your counter and get nice and dark. And I'm gonna add into that some canned pumpkin.
Oh.
That goes right in. So mine has, you know, some stuff that's good for you in there mixed in with the sugar.
Now, is that pumpkin pie filling or just straight up pumpkin?
It's straight up pumpkin. Okay. And I always find that I open a can of that and I've got just a little left. So I'll either mix it in my yogurt in the morning or I'll put it in a smoothie, or like this, you can make a little pumpkin pie pudding with it.
Oh, yeah.
And then I'm gonna add to it my vanilla pudding. So that goes right in.
There's the pudding part, vanilla.
Yeah, a little vanilla pudding, and that's gonna give us our nice sweetness and richness. Mix it, mix it, mix it, and I've got pumpkin pie spice.
Okay, your best friend.
I love the pumpkin pie spice, so put some of that in, and just really, really mix it. So, there we go, it's looking good. And now I'm gonna put it into my little cup here.
Oh, wow, salivating. Salivating over here.
Some sliced banana to it, and then I've got crushed graham crackers here.
Okay.
Oh. Give it a nice little curb appeal, little texture.
Mm-hmm.
Very good.
Beautiful.
There it is.
Okay, let's move on to our pumpkin-ricotta pancakes. So we're gonna start with 1.5 cups of all-purpose flour, 2 tablespoons of dark brown sugar, 1 tablespoon granulated sugar, 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder, and 1.5 teaspoons of baking soda. 3/4 of a teaspoon of cinnamon, 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg, some cloves, and a little bit of ginger. Those are the pumpkin spices, right? The cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves, and ginger. Okay, now for the wet ingredients, we're gonna take a couple of eggs, 1.5 cups of buttermilk, 3/4 cups of ricotta, and 1/2 cup of pumpkin puree. The thing I like about the ricotta and the pumpkin is it's actually gonna lighten up the pancakes. So we're gonna put 1/2 cup of pumpkin puree in here. All right, let's just make sure we whisk this up well. So we're just gonna fold the wet into the dry. And like with most batters, I like to let it rest. I just find that when I let batters rest, I get a better result. So we're gonna make a spiced caramel to go on top of the pumpkin ricotta pancakes. And by spiced, I'm really talking about pumpkin-like spices. So we're gonna start with some heavy cream. And then we're gonna throw in a couple cinnamon sticks, 1/2 dozen cloves, whole cloves, some star anise, and then some fresh ginger. We don't have to take the skin off because we're gonna strain this out anyway, but the ginger is actually gonna give it a really nice kind of spice. I'm also gonna put a splash of apple juice in here as well, about 1/2 cup. The apple juice will give it a nice sort of fruitiness, a little bit of sweetness. We're gonna let this come to a simmer, cut it down, and let it sit so that all these spices steep into the cream. All right, so let's make some caramel. We're gonna start with 1.5 cups of sugar. A 1/2 cup of water, and then a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar. The apple cider vinegar is a really nice sort of contrast to the sweetness. You're gonna get lots of sweetness from the sugar and creating a caramel. And also, you'll see that caramel crystallizes a lot. You can hear that sizzle immediately. You want them to have a little bit of a crust, a little golden brown on the outside. All right, remember our spiced cream? Cinnamon and some star anise, the fresh ginger. So we're just gonna pour this right into our caramel. It's gonna bubble up a little bit. It's okay, be careful. Beautiful. Just gonna stir this about. And now we have a spiced caramel sauce. Do not put your finger in there. As much as you'd like to taste it, do not do it. It cannot be hotter. I've made that mistake, believe me. So I'm just constantly whisking it to make sure that the caramel and the cream all becomes incorporated. That looks really beautiful. All right, we're just gonna let that sit. Let's check on our pancakes. The spices in the pumpkin, because, you know, they're ground warm spices, they'll actually promote a little bit of golden brown. Okay, so I'm gonna put a little bit of the apple brandy, just a splash, into the caramel. And we're just gonna let the caramel just cool, just a tiny bit. We're just gonna give it a little more apple flavor. I love the aroma of pumpkin, especially those spices, you know, in pancakes, they're amazing. During the holidays, I have to have something with pumpkin. And so pancakes is a really good way, especially for brunch, to kind of get that going. So we're just gonna take some of our caramel. So beautiful. And apples and caramel, pumpkin, and all those spices just go so well together. Creme fraiche is like cultured sour cream, and so it's gonna have a little tartness to it. So we're just gonna put a little bit of the creme fraiche right on top. And then I'm gonna take a little bit of cinnamon, just finish it off just like that. Never have enough cinnamon, never. You know, the ricotta really lightens them up, but you have this flavor of all those spices. You have a little bit of that pumpkin in there. I have to say, the star of the whole thing is this beautiful caramel sauce.
Next up is my pumpkin oatmeal. I'm just adding a little more flavor to your regular oatmeal. I've got 2 cups of water in here and 2 cups of almond milk, which adds this nice nuttiness to the flavor of the oatmeal. But the star of the show is just some regular canned pumpkin, some golden raisins, some pepitas, and of course, some oats. And this whole recipe came about, I think it was maybe a couple weeks after Thanksgiving, when I was really craving some pumpkin pie, and there was none in the house. It was early in the morning, but I still had this can of pumpkin puree. So I thought, hey, I can put this in my oatmeal and just bring back some of those great, warm, comforting flavors that remind me of Thanksgiving, you know? It's just one of the most magical times of year. I love it. So in goes the can of pumpkin puree into this milk mixture. And you know what? You can use regular milk if you don't have almond milk or can't be bothered to get it. No big deal. I just like that nutty flavor that it adds. Okay. Now for some golden raisins, about a couple tablespoons. I'm adding them now so they get nice and plump and moist in here. And here's what makes it special. I've got a bunch of spices, of course, that I want to add, and I'm trying to approximate pumpkin pie spice mix. Say that 3 times fast. I've got a 1/4 teaspoon of ground cardamom, that nice flowery flavor, the warmth of some ground cinnamon, and some ground cloves, which really makes me think of the magic of the holiday time, you know? All right, whisk that all together. I'm gonna let that come to a boil. And that's when I'm gonna add my oats. Look at that gorgeous color. Isn't that great? It's such a good color to wake up to. In the meantime, for a nice crunchy topping to go on top of that oatmeal, I'm gonna toast up some pumpkin seeds. Pepitas, are they pretty and green? But to get the full flavor, I'm gonna toast them up a little bit until they're golden brown and fragrant. Keep an eye on them so they don't burn. Let me check on this milk here. It's coming to a boil, but I just want to taste it and make sure that it's seasoned well enough, because this is it. This is what your oats are going to soak up. Oh, it tastes so good. It just needs a little salt to really bring out that pumpkin flavor, but it really does taste like pumpkin pie. So I'm just going to add my oats. We've got 4 cups of liquid in there, so I'm going to use 2 cups of oats. And these are the quick cooking old-fashioned oats, so they should only take 10 to 15 minutes to cook until they get nice and luscious and creamy. Oh, it's so good. I love this oatmeal. And actually what I do is I make this at the beginning of the week on a Monday, and I make enough to last me the whole week. And then every morning I warm up a portion with some milk. This is a pumpkin oatmeal, and look at how gorgeous it is. I have a cute tray here of all the little toppings you can put over it. So I'm using some heavy cream, just a little. It's a special occasion, you're here. And then a little bit of honey over the top. And then if you don't like honey, I've got some maple sugar here as well. But I love honey. Thank goodness for those little bees. And then for some crunch, some toasted pepitas, these little pumpkin seeds. That looks so good.
Pumpkin scones with coffee glaze. I'm combining packed brown sugar, very packed, with some all-purpose flour and baking powder, and then a good amount of pumpkin pie spice. I don't think there's a scone on earth that I don't love, but there is something about pumpkin scones that really lights my fire, especially this time of year. Now I'm gonna sprinkle in some cold pieces of butter, and then I wanna cut the butter into the dry ingredients using my trusty rusty pastry cutter. I'm gonna keep going until these resemble coarse crumbs. All right, that looks great. So now I'm gonna make the pumpkin mixture, which is just pumpkin puree and 2 eggs and heavy cream. Ooh, that's a good combination. And then I'll whisk this together. Now, this is not pumpkin pie filling, it's pumpkin puree, and sometimes those things are easily confused. Pumpkin pie filling has spices and everything in it, so this is just the straight up pumpkin, because we already added the spices to the dry ingredients. Whew, that was a long explanation. All right, so you guessed it, this gets mixed in with the dry ingredients, and I just kind of add it slowly while I move it around with a spatula just to make mixing that much easier. And I don't want to just mix this to smithereens because I don't want the scones to be tough. So I'm just going to kind of stir it lightly until it all comes together in a magical orange dough. All right, so I'm going to turn this out onto the board. And if some of the dry isn't all totally mixed in, that's normal, because it'll get mixed in when you form it. So basically just turn it over a couple of times just to get everything mixed together. And this dough is so moist because of the pumpkin, so you don't even need a rolling pin. You can just use your fingers to push it into a long rectangle. Okay, so you can see what I did here, Paige. It's just basically a long rectangle. It's about 15 inches by about 2.5, 3 inches. All right, now these go into the oven. We're gonna bake these at 425 degrees for about 20 to 23 minutes until they're perfect. And then we'll let them cool and glaze them. The scones are just about cooled, and look how pretty they look, Paige. Oh man, it's all I can do not to eat one of those right now. Okay, so I'm making a delicious coffee glaze, and I just sifted a bunch of powdered sugar into a bowl. And I'm gonna add a little pinch of salt, because that just always helps things not get too sweet. And then to the powdered sugar, I'm gonna add some very strong coffee and some melted butter. And then I'm gonna get in here with the whisk and turn this into a glaze. All right. You can just keep whisking until you get it to the consistency you want. You can add a little less liquid if you want it to be more of a frosting. You can add a little more liquid if you want the glaze to be thin. So I'll grab a spoon and just spoon it over a scone. Oh man. And I want most of it to stay on top. If a little of it kind of dribbles over the side, that's just fine, because it makes it look just a little more decadent and rich. And then I'll take a little pumpkin pie spice, a little more, and sprinkle it on. How good does that look right there? Woo, wow. All right, I'm gonna do the same thing to the rest of the scones. All right, pumpkin scones with coffee glaze, a little sprinkle of pumpkin pie spice. I've got to let them sit, and then I'm going to fill the basket with them. They're going to be just perfect for Aunt Mabel.
I am making pumpkin lasagna. It's super hearty and cheesy. It's got crispy, salty bacon, loads of bitter chard, and it's all held together by a creamy, no-cook pumpkin sauce. To start, I'm crisping up bacon. Bacon and pumpkin together are a match made in savory heaven. Now that I've rendered my bacon fat, I'm gonna use it to cook up my veggies. I have 2 big onions that are thinly sliced. A good pinch of salt will help them soften down. I'll cook these just for about 6 to 8 minutes until they're soft. These are smelling really nice. I'll add a few bunches of chopped bitter chard and let it cook down. Okay, another pinch of salt will help draw the moisture out and allow it to soften. I love a veggie-packed lasagna because everything is good when it's underneath a blanket of noodles and cheese. I'll grate in some fresh nutmeg for warmth and then let these veggies drain while I put together my other layers. Time for the star of this lasagna, the pumpkin. It comes from a can. This sauce is so easy. I'll thin it out with 1 cup of low-sodium chicken stock and 3/4 of a cup of heavy cream for added richness, and a tablespoon of chipotles and adobo sauce, which are so smoky and a little bit spicy, but not overly so. Because in order for pumpkin to really lean savory, it's gotta have something smoky, something salty, the bacon, and something bitter, the chard. Salt, a teaspoon of it. I'll mix this together. So that's it. I'll do the cheese layer now. I'll start with 1.5 pounds of whole milk ricotta. You gotta have that fluffy layer in a lasagna. I'll crack in an egg so that this layer can set. And then 1/2 cup of grated parm and some freshly chopped parsley. Lasagna sometimes uses a few more bowls than I want it to, but then when I have a gigantic casserole of lasagna in my fridge for days after eating it, it's all worth it. Okay, got all my components ready. It's time to assemble. First layer is a cup of sauce to prevent any noodles from sticking to the bottom of the pan, and top with 3 no-boil lasagna noodles. And then I'll spread on 1/3 of the ricotta mixture. I wanna cover the entirety of the noodle. That's the secret to no-boil noodles, is you really gotta cover them with stuff so that they actually absorb moisture and get cooked. 1/3 of my veggies. Chard smells good. And 1/3 of the bacon, which I'll just crumble all over. Bacon and chard together are really nice. And these will punctuate the bites with crispy saltiness. And then 1 cup of mozzarella cheese. And it's important to have the mozzarella go all the way to the edge so that it gets crispy. Okay, I'll repeat these layers 2 more times and then finish with noodles, the rest of the pumpkin sauce, loads of mozzarella cheese, and Parmesan. Oh yeah. I'll cover it up with foil, and then this will go in at 425 degrees for 30 minutes, and then I'll uncover it and bake for an additional 15 minutes until it gets golden and bubbly on top. I think I'm hearing that cheese bubble. Oh, that's beautiful. Oh my goodness. Oh yeah, all of the brown cheese splotches. I'll finish with a sprinkle of crushed red pepper for an extra hit of spiciness. I think I'm just gonna risk burning my mouth because it smells too good not to taste it. I'm going for a crispy edge. It's gooey, it's cheesy. That little sweetness from the pumpkin is so good. Holy pumpkins, this is what dreams are made of.
Today I'm gonna make a pumpkin chocolate swirl bread. I love those 2 flavors together. With recipes like this, where there's lots of ingredients and they have to be exact, I always come with my recipe because you really need to be, spot on in terms of measurements. All right, so I'm gonna start with my wet ingredients first. 1.5 cups of sugar. And actually you're saying sugar is a dry ingredient. Actually, it's a wet ingredient, especially because when it melts, it turns to liquid. 1/2 cup of vegetable oil. I'm gonna start this in our mixer and just sort of beat some air into it, so it's nice and smooth. All right, then I'm gonna add 2 eggs here. So 1 egg at a time. And then we're gonna add 1 cup of canned pumpkin. The canned pumpkin is the way to go. It's always consistent. We have some vanilla, and we're just gonna whip this just until it's incorporated. 1 3/4 cups of flour. All right, 1 teaspoon of baking soda. Make sure it's level. 1 teaspoon of pumpkin spice. So that's a combination of all those spices. I like to put a little extra in. Like that flavor. And then half a teaspoon of baking powder. And then a little salt. Just whisk this up. And then we're gonna incorporate the dry ingredients just until they're well mixed into the wet ingredients. And then we're gonna take some semi-sweet chocolate that's just melted. So I'm gonna drizzle this in. Make sure you get all that out of there. And basically I'm just gonna like swirl it or marble it into the pumpkin batter. There you go. So then I have my cake pan, just brushed on the inside with some butter. And we're gonna preheat our oven to 350 degrees. And this is gonna bake for about an hour. Look how beautiful that looks. 350 degrees for about an hour. So then I'm gonna make a very quick flavored butter. We're gonna use some orange marmalade and some orange zest as well to flavor our butter. All right, so you just wanna make sure that this is well combined. I'm actually gonna leave this out so that it's nice and soft at room temperature. All right, the moment I've been waiting for. We are going to break into this pumpkin chocolate quick bread. It smells amazing. I love all those pumpkin spices. Chocolate goes so nicely with it. First of all, look how beautiful it is. You see the swirls with the chocolate and the pumpkin, and I'm just gonna spread some of that marmalade butter right on top. This stuff is good. And then if it gets like a little bit stale, you can always put it in the toaster and bring it back to life. All right, give it a taste. Orange, chocolate, and pumpkin. Perfect combination.
All right, straight to the freezer for our dessert. I'm sure you've heard it plenty of times before. When baking, cold is what you need. Freezing is even better. It's gonna make the crust or the cookie crunch light, airy, crisp. It's great. So, in the freezer, I had all of my ingredients for the crust of our tarts, which is our flour, sugar, salt, and then I've got my really cold butter. Get my blade down, and then my lid. Now to this, I'm just gonna add the cold butter after I give it a nice run through. Don't forget the pecans are in here as well. We're gonna make a pecan pumpkin tart with the crust that has pecans in it. Flavors all over the place. All right, so about 6 tablespoons of our rock hard and cold butter. Put that right in, blitz it. And this is gonna be our dough, basically, that we're gonna press into our little mini tarts. All right, now to that, just about 2 tablespoons of water, but watch it for texture. What's most important, it's not too wet. Okay. I've overdone it before, and then I just start adding in all the other ingredients. Okay, that is perfect. I'll show you what it looks like. This is what you are going for here. This right here. So, put that on a nice floured surface, and I'm going to make this into one big ball. Put the flour on the hands. And I'm gonna turn this big ball into 24 smaller balls and get them into our mini tarts ready for the fridge. Oh yeah, it's gotta cool down again. I'm gonna put my dough balls into a pre-greased mini muffin tin. All right, flour everywhere, but these are ready to go into the refrigerator to cool down again. I put all that body heat on them. And like I said, cool is where it's at when you're baking. I wanna build the custard. So first things first, I wanna go ahead and get my eggs ready to go. I love this recipe. It's a cross between a pumpkin pie and a pecan pie, which I love pecan pie. And I love pumpkin pie too, so. All right, so 1 full egg and 1 yolk. To that, I'm gonna add a tablespoon of sugar. Go ahead and make sure you measure. This is baking. And this is for your friends and family, hopefully, so take a little bit of time to measure away. So that's 1 tablespoon of our sugar. And then a little trick I'll show you. If you're using some dark corn syrup like I am right here, or honey, any other thick liquid, and you're gonna measure it, just go ahead and spray the measuring cup with a little bit of cooking spray before you pour it in, and everything will come out. Be sure you're measuring properly. All right, so we're gonna put a 1/2 cup of that in. Where's my 1/2 cup? That's gonna go right in. Now watch how easily it pours out. Look at that. Come on, shortcut. And then to this, we're gonna add a 1/2 cup of our pumpkin filling or our puree. Now, you can almost eyeball this, but I'll go ahead and scoop a little bit. This is just gonna be the moisture and the flavor. Let me tell you, the hint of pumpkin in this is great. So a couple of scoops of that, and then just a little bit of vanilla. I wanna go ahead and get my whisk out. Now, we're not done here. We want to add some pecans, but really quick, I'm going to mix this around. All right. And I'm going to go ahead and chop a handful of pecans. Now, this is where you just do what you like, but don't go overboard because we still want it to be nice and liquidy. Let me wipe off my knife. Okay. And give these a nice little run. All right, pecans go right in. And this is great because pecans are also in our crust that's in the oven right now, blind baking for us. And see, our filling is done. Good to go. Now, blind baking, just so you know, it's basically just getting our crust cooked for us and ready to go so it's crispy and crunchy and, you know, it's perfectly cooked for what we're about to do to it, which is add the custard. And they're looking good. Come on out, babies. I love this dessert because if you're gonna have a big dinner, you don't feel too guilty when you just pop a few in your mouth. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and fill each of my 24 up and then put a little pecan half on top of each of them and get them back in the oven. Going into my 350-degree oven for a twist on the classic mini pecan pumpkin pies.
Let's make some scones. Pumpkin, cranberry, flavors I love very much. A scone is kind of like a rough and tumble biscuit in a way. I love the sort of rustic feel of a scone. So let's fire away. We're gonna start with a couple of cups of flour, a 1/3 cup of light brown sugar, some cinnamon, a teaspoon of baking powder, some ginger, and a 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda, and a pinch of salt. Those are the dry ingredients. Just gonna mix these up. So then we're gonna take 1/2 cup of butter, and I'm gonna just very carefully take a pastry blender and just cut the butter into the dry ingredients so that we don't mix it completely, and that's gonna actually help give it that flaky texture. So we have a 1/3 cup of buttermilk, nice and tart, 1/2 cup of pumpkin puree, and canned pumpkin will do. Some vanilla extract. So we're gonna take the dry ingredients and we're gonna pour the wet into the dry. Just until it's mixed. And then we're gonna fold in some cranberries and some crystallized ginger. I love this stuff. You really wanna cut the crystallized ginger, it's very strong. You wanna cut it to very small dice. You know, the ginger is naturally spicy. There's a little sugar on the outside. It's gonna be a tiny bit sweet. We have the tartness of the cranberries. Just gonna fold these in, just so all this is mixed together, the wet and the dry. All right, I just want them to be about 1.5 inches in height. And then you can just cut them up. The thing I love about scones is there's really no, it doesn't matter what shape they're in. Almost like a pie. Okay, a little bit of cream right on top. This looks very pretty. And this is gonna help give it a nice sort of golden color. So 375 degrees for about 20 to 25 minutes. Sprinkle a little sugar. Pop them in the oven. It's gonna smell like scones in about 10 minutes. All right, 375 for about 20 to 25 minutes. It's gonna start smelling like scones in here in a couple of minutes. My heavy cream, and I let it actually sit in the refrigerator so it gets nice and cold, and the bowl itself gets really nice and cold as well. So we're gonna put a whisk on here. Okay. So we're gonna let this go. And we can just let this go. I'm gonna put a little bit of salt in here. And we're gonna make our maple butter. Good maple syrup. Let's check our scones. The cake tester comes out dry, which means that they're ready. So we're gonna take these out and put them on a rack. We're gonna let these cool for a minute. We'll keep making our butter. All right, that's it. We're actually waiting for it to separate, so it actually almost looks like it's curdled cream, but that's when you know you have butter. So just gonna take this out. I mean, if it really starts to separate and you have solids and you have milk underneath it, you can actually strain out the milk and then keep the solids, and that's the butter. But I think for our purposes here, this is just gonna work perfectly fine. Look at that, pretty nice. So we take a little bit of our butter, our maple butter. A little bit crispy on the outside, very tender on the inside. You can taste the spices in the pumpkin, like the ginger and the cinnamon. The cranberries are nice and tart.
My pumpkin bundt cake with white chocolate glaze.
Ooh.
My pumpkin of choice is canned pumpkin. Jeffrey, you're gonna make cream cheese filling. This is just cream cheese, sugar, vanilla, the usual suspects,
right.
a little nutmeg. So to this, I'm gonna add my 4 eggs and just dark brown sugar and then light sugar. I love the dark brown with the pumpkin. It's just so right. Molasses.
Whoa.
Jeffrey's got that cream cheese filling going. And when you're done, Jeffrey, put it in the piping bag and let's get it in the fridge a little bit.
Yes, chef.
I've made some brown butter. And I do a little combination of half brown butter and half olive oil. You know you love a little butter and a little oil in a cake.
I love butter.
Flour, and then salt, baking powder, and baking soda. And then the fall broken into ginger, nutmeg, clove, cinnamon, right in there. The dry ingredients in there, right? Spread them out.
Smart.
Just a little, be gentle. Bundt pan, butter it, grease it, grease underneath it,
everything.
grease
it
the
hurts
oven,
to look at it. It's so shiny. It
grease
really
the
does.
floor. Now, this is a little bit of strategy, which is you want to drop the batter in, and you want to drop a little under half here.
Yeah.
Carve a little trench in here if you want with a, just get in there a little bit, and then just go in there, right? And you want to kind of press down so that the filling goes down into the batter. You're using your leverage that you already have.
Look
and
at
then
this kid.
drop the batter on top.
Drop it like it's gourd.
Yeah, you can't smear or spread here, which is like generally my impulse. I love it. All right, so you've got your batter on top. Give it just a little
bit.
You do.
Air out, yeah.
You need it, you need it. So I'm gonna go into the oven with this, 350 degrees for about an hour. And it's nice to cool a cake in the pan because it gives you time to wonder if you're gonna be able to unmold it. All right.
That's what I was going to say. I was like, oh, God.
Good, it's so good.
Perfect.
Oh, peekaboo.
My goodness.
Gorgeous. Cordiality. Oh my God, it's beautiful.
So I have some white chocolate, which
Fancy
I've
that.
warmed gently over a double boiler, and what I'm gonna warm it with, I have underneath.
A white choc ganache.
Yeah, a little, exactly. Pinch of salt in there, of course.
And those
Tiny
orange
bit.
slices.
And I just run the orange over. Okay, if you let it sit for a little bit and cool, it thickens up even more, and you definitely want to do that, right? Gets really thicker. Yeah, and then we go over it.
Oh, Ray, waterfall.
Racing down the ridges.
What am I gonna do when I make a cake at home and you guys aren't here to
I
make
don't
this
know.
peanut gallery?
Oh my God, you got something inside there too I forgot about.
Totally forgot.
Revealed.
Cream
Just
cheese
tell us
We
the
reveal?
vibes.
I mean,
Oh, yeah.
Come on, girl.
Oh,
Okay.
what is that?
Chicago.
Looks like an oven mitt.
it's like Chicago.
It does. That looks like Michigan.
Chocolate marshmallow pumpkin pie. I'm gonna make some chocolate ganache. I've got some cream that's been simmering away, and I broke up some chocolate pieces. Okay, this is about halfway mixed together, so it's a good time to add just a little bit of vanilla. Okay, this ganache looks beautiful. It's nice and smooth. So I'm gonna pour this all over the top of this pumpkin pie. It just instantly transforms it. I love the combination of pumpkin and chocolate too. I don't do that very often. Okay, I got all the pumpkin covered. So I'm gonna put this into the freezer so the chocolate will set. It won't take long at all. While it sets in the freezer, I'm gonna whip up a creamy marshmallow topping for the pie. It starts with a 7-ounce container of marshmallow cream. It goes into the mixer with 1/4 cup of room temperature butter. I'll just beat them together until they're combined. Next, I'll add 2 cups of heavy cream to another mixer bowl and get it going with the whisk attachment. When it's frothy, I'll gradually add a cup of powdered sugar, whisk it until it forms stiff peaks. Then I'll get the marshmallow mixture into the cream and beat it until it's all incorporated, smooth, and creamy. Okay, the ganache is all set. I'm gonna put the pie right into a ceramic pie dish. I'm gonna get this glorious, creamy marshmallow topping right on the pie. Now, I thought about sprinkling nuts or chocolate candies over the top, but then I remembered these fall lollipops, all different colors, and I thought, how pretty will these be? So I am just gonna stick them all over the pie. No particular order. I love the colors, they're so gorgeous.
Pumpkin pasta with winter herbs and Parmesan cheese. Perfect for the grown-up table. Are you guys a grown-up table today?
Not really.
I mean, I'll sit there.
Semi?
We'll pretend to be grown-ups,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. It might not
We play
last.
grown-ups on TV.
Yes, we do. Convincingly.
So-
Some of us.
So I think the shape of the pasta, I feel like we always have to talk about it. I'm doing a little fusilli, right? So
So I'd
we're gonna
smell
put
them.
a little bit of fried sage and fried rosemary on top because
fun.
these winter herbs are so strong. Let's just stem them all. The stems, they taste like cough syrup for sage and rosemary. So we're just gonna
don't
fry
want
them up and flake them a little bit and put them on top of the
very.
dish. Very grown up, I feel. I've browned a little bit of butter, and then I'm just gonna drop my brown butter, and I do brown it in a separate pan so that if it gets a little bit overcooked, you can pour it off and just leave behind the little bits.
So you got some garlic in there?
So 2 cloves of garlic, right? And we're just building this nice and easy. A dollop of fresh ginger. I'd say a couple teaspoons once grated.
Wow.
Well, you need the whole can of pumpkin right in there. I mean, you could literally open it and drop it right in there. And we're just mixing.
You know what I love about this? Usually you see the pumpkin in a ravioli. Right
Oh,
inside.
yes, with the
So
brown
this is
butter and
sort
the
of like
sage over the
reverse,
top.
like this is a reverse of that, which I love.
We're also pulling it towards the savory, and that's kind of a fun idea. There's a lot of sweets at Halloween. Pumpkin can be sweet. Here we've got the garlic, a little pepper, salt. All these things are pulling it in a more savory direction. I put a tiny pinch of brown sugar. Now, I'm even cheating. This is the kind of sauce you make while you're cooking the pasta. I'll cheat and just steal a little. We talk about drain your pasta.
No.
I'm gonna cheat and get some water in there now from the cooking pasta. And we do that, just to grab a little bit of that starch that's coming out of the pasta and pull it back into our dish. We wanna coat the pasta. Those fusilli, they trap all the sauce in their little crevices. And I love that balance, maybe a little extra black pepper, just to kind of have that balance. Little coarse salt, go deep on the salt and pepper here. Some parm in there now, right, to give it a little bit of body. I'm gonna put for you, Jeffrey, 1 tiny dot of butter. Don't put it if you don't want to. You know what I mean? Maybe a little more. Don't be afraid of that water. I feel like people freak out, like, how come it didn't come out the right texture? You are driving.
Yeah.
Make it the texture and the consistency you want. There's always water or stock or other things that can take you, you know, to where you want to go. My father liked pasta kind of loose, like the sauce kind of
soupy.
a little bit.
I like
and my
it
mother
saucy.
liked one dot of tomato paste-like sauce on a giant bowl of pasta.
Just enough sauce. That's
Just
right.
enough
Her
sauce.
whole life
And then
was taking away the sauce.
right from the pot of pasta right on top of this. And so pumpkin-y, right?
Do you cook it like 90%, or is that all the way done?
Jeffrey, I'm glad you asked. I went a little farther than I might normally with this, just because you can. It's that simple, and I think you've got your built-in texture from the canned pumpkin.
Yeah.
But these hardy herbs are actually easier to stem when they're fried a little bit. Right?
A little higher, Jeff. For
And
dramatic effect.
I already shut the heat off.
you go.
Once the sauce is hot.
Now
and
you're
the,
getting it.
I mean, a little
Sorry.
more flair, please. It's Halloween. You know what I'm saying? That was really good.
You want this sage in there yet?
A little bit, sure. Let's drop a few in the bowl. I'm just adding cheese because,
Because, yes, it's cheese.
Yeah, it's cheese.
right?
Well, I mean, it's the inside of the pasta, right? We'll put a little cheese in there.
Just a little. Don't overdo
Yeah.
whatever you do.
Get involved with something over there. Keep on shredding. Yeah. Let's look that way.
Yeah, just a little
You need some
taste, a
pepper.
tiny taste. A little bit more salt.
Okay, Iron Chef.
These are my favorite kind of meals, though, for during the week because, like you said,
yeah.
you made this sauce while the pasta was cooking. It is a quick dinner, and
yeah.
it's delicious and healthy, actually. All that pumpkin in there.
Fiber alert.
You know how you
Fiber
can
alert?
Fiber
No,
alert with all that
Oh,
pumpkin.
no, come on. Not with the hell. This is a holiday.
Look at that. Beautiful.
Oh, this is definitely
adults.
giving
This
me
is
adult
adult
table
play.
vibes.
Can you
Yeah.
help me? Will you?
That is
I'm gonna.
gorgeous.
You put a little herb
Looks
on
like
top
you're in
and
a
little
restaurant.
cheese.
Yes, ma'am.
Sage. Look at that. It already smells so good. Smelling is a part of eating, you know?
Aromatherapy.
You can't do one without the other. It's a proven fact.
You guys,
Love
this
watching
is
you guys.
so crazy delicious. And it's not even pumpkin forward. Do you know what I mean? The pumpkin is just in there relaxing. It's fall forward, that's for sure.
I love pie. I've loved it all my life, so I almost feel disloyal saying this, but my current favorite dessert is pumpkin tiramisu. It is to die for. I put a can of plain pumpkin puree into a bowl, and I'm adding a package of softened mascarpone cheese, and I'm just gonna combine this. It's really important that the mascarpone is room temperature soft because otherwise it's difficult to mix in with the pumpkin. Now I've got some cream that I've been starting to whip, and I'm gonna sweeten it up with half a cup of brown sugar and some ground cinnamon and 3 teaspoons of vanilla. And then I'll whip this until it's just about stiff, but not quite. I'll tell you why I love a Thanksgiving version of tiramisu. It's one of those desserts that you can make the day before Thanksgiving. Okay, that is looking good. So I'll fold in the pumpkin mascarpone mixture. One mistake some people make when making pumpkin desserts with canned pumpkin is they accidentally use pumpkin pie filling. If you use the pumpkin pie filling, sometimes you wind up with a dessert that's too sweet. I know that people make that mistake because I was once one of those people. Now the next thing I'm gonna fold into this is a luscious custard. I made it earlier and it's been chilling in the fridge. So while I mix it in, let me tell you how to whip this up. I added 1/4 cup of sugar to 5 egg yolks, whisked them, put the bowl over a pan of simmering water, then gradually whisked in 1/2 cup of bourbon, cooked it for about 5 minutes, took it off the heat, then covered and chilled it. This custard smells so good because of that bourbon. Okay, this is where you really want to be gentle with your folding. You never want to just stir it and beat it up. Ooh, I definitely want to lick this spatula. But first, I'm going to cover the bowl with plastic wrap and get this in the fridge. All right. See you in an hour. I have all the elements ready, so I'm gonna assemble the tiramisu. I'm using store-bought ladyfingers, which I think is the best kind of ladyfinger to use for tiramisu. Now, if you don't have access to store-bought ladyfingers, you can just make a simple white cake or a sponge cake. I've done that before too, and it works great. I think just 3 more will fit on this bottom layer. So the first thing you wanna do with the ladyfingers is soak them in a really yummy espresso syrup. This one has some nice spices, so while I spoon this over the top, let me tell you how to make this. I added 2 teaspoons of instant espresso to 1½ cups of boiling water and stirred it until it dissolved. Then I added ½ cup of brown sugar, a teaspoon of cinnamon, ½ teaspoon of ground nutmeg, and stirred the syrup until the sugar had dissolved. 1 more spoonful. So the next thing I'll do is add 1/3 of the pumpkin mixture. Spread this evenly over the ladyfingers. You want to be gentle so you don't disrupt the layer below. So for the next layer, I'm going to grate on some semi-sweet chocolate. You can do dark chocolate, bittersweet, whatever you happen to have in your pantry. Okay, now the next thing I'm going to add are ground Gingersnap cookies. Just a nice, even layer. Can you imagine the flavor from these? Now I'm going to repeat the layers 2 more times. There it is, pumpkin tiramisu. Definitely my favorite Thanksgiving dessert.
I'm gonna make a pumpkin flan, and it's kind of like a mashup of pumpkin pie and creme caramel. So I'm gonna start with 1 can of sweetened condensed milk, 1 can of evaporated milk, 1 can of pumpkin. Just make sure it's pumpkin puree, not pumpkin pie filling. They're completely different things, but they come in cans that look very similar. ½ cup of mascarpone. Just gonna make it nice and thick and rich. Just gonna whisk all these together. And when it's nice and smooth, I'm gonna add 4 extra large eggs. So 1 teaspoon of vanilla. And I have maple extract, which really kind of boosts the flavor of maple. ½ teaspoon, it's very, very strong. Make sure it's pure maple extract. Okay, 1½ teaspoons of cinnamon, because of course you always have to have cinnamon with pumpkin. And 1/2. It smells so good. And 1/2 teaspoon of nutmeg. And the last thing is orange zest. And the zest has more flavor than the juice, so I always use it when I can. Just stir it in. And that's basically the custard. I'm just gonna pour it over the maple caramel that's already in the pan. It's just fantastic. Let me tell you how I made it. It's pretty straightforward. I put 3/4 cup of sugar in a small saucepan, poured in 1/3 cup of pure grade A maple syrup, 1/3 cup of water, brought them to a boil, swirling the pan to dissolve the sugar, and cooked the caramel at a low boil without stirring for 8 minutes. When the mixture turned golden brown and registered 230 degrees on a candy thermometer, I turned the heat off, swirled in 1/2 teaspoon of fleur de sel, poured the caramel into the cake pan, and let it cool for 30 minutes. Okay, I'm just gonna pour this mixture on top, and I wanna do it kind of slowly so it doesn't mix in with the caramel. Okay. So now I'm gonna put it in a water bath, which is in a pan. And I'm gonna put water all the way around. Make sure you don't get any water into the flan. And what this does is make sure that the temperature around the custard never gets to be more than 212 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm just using the hottest tap water. Okay, ready for the oven. From here on, it's all about baking and chilling. I'll put the flan in the center of a 350-degree oven for 75 minutes. By then it should be firm, but still slightly jiggly in the middle. And when I put a knife in the center, it should come out clean. Remove the flan from the water bath and put it on a cooling rack. Then when it's completely cool, I'll cover it in plastic wrap and put it in the fridge for at least 3 hours. So the flan is chilled. And now the moment of high drama when I take it out of the pan. Okay, it's thoroughly chilled, which is great. I'm just gonna run a knife right around the outside. How good does this look? There it is, just like that. Whoa. And the caramel is just gonna go all the way around. I think it needs a little orange zest on top, don't you? It's so creamy and absolutely delicious. I don't know, I may have to skip the turkey and go directly to dessert. This is fabulous.
Pumpkin rum cake with maple whipped cream. It starts with 3 cups of flour and 2 cups of sugar, and then just 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And that's it for the dry. I'll just give it a little stir. Okay, that's all mixed together. So that's the dry ingredients. Now I'll get started on the wet. I've got 1/2 cup of buttermilk, and I'll add 2 eggs and 2 teaspoons of baking soda. Now I'll add 2 teaspoons of vanilla. Hey, I just measured vanilla for the first time in about 7 years. I usually just splash it in there. It's Thanksgiving, it's a special occasion. And then 1/2 teaspoon of maple extract. And then I'll just use a fork to whisk up the eggs. I love Thanksgiving anyway, but having a little Friendsgiving celebration on the side just adds to how much I love Thanksgiving. It's just great to get together with girlfriends every now and then. Now I'm gonna move over to the stove. I have a saucepan with 2 sticks of salted butter. And I'm gonna add a can of pumpkin puree. This is probably my favorite shortcut Thanksgiving ingredient. Now I wanna add to that pumpkin-y flavor, so I'm gonna add a couple of teaspoons of pumpkin pie spice. How good is this gonna be? And I'll give this a stir while it starts to heat up. I think Friendsgivings are so much fun because you can have a little bit of fun with what you make. You don't have to stick to the traditional Thanksgiving dishes if you don't want to. Okay, that's all whisked together. So I've got a pot of water. It's just about to boil. And I'm gonna measure 3/4 of a cup. And pour it into the saucepan. So we really have 2 wet ingredients going on, the buttermilk mixture and the pumpkin mixture. Rum cakes always remind me of my mother-in-law, Nan. She made a rum cake around the holidays every year. That was the best thing I had ever tasted when she first made it for me. I have never gotten that cake out of my mind. So delicious. Okay, the pumpkin mixture is nice and smooth and very hot, so I'm gonna turn off the heat and I'll put all of this together to make the cake batter. The first thing I like to do is pour in the pumpkin mixture. So I'll grab the buttermilk mixture. You just want to keep folding until you no longer see any hint of the flour. Now I've got a regular Bundt pan and I greased and floured it just to make sure that the cake doesn't stick. All right, so now that the batter's in the pan, the action moves to the oven. Baking first. The cake goes into a 350-degree oven for 45 minutes. Then I'll check that it's done by inserting a skewer in the center. Yep, that's good. Then I'll take it out and cool it on the counter in the pan. If you think this pumpkin cake looks good now, just wait till you see it when it's doused in a delicious rum syrup. That's what I'm gonna make now. I've got 2 sticks of salted butter and I just melted them. And I'm adding a cup of sugar, and I'll add just a couple of tablespoons of water. The rum comes later. First, I'm gonna make the syrup, which is really easy to make. I'll stir this around. Okay, now I'm gonna raise the heat, and this needs to cook for about 3 minutes to thicken, so I'll see you on the other side. Okay, the syrup has been boiling away, so I'm turning the heat off before I add the most important ingredient, a whole cup of rum. This is actually spiced rum, and you want to pour it in slowly so that syrup mixture doesn't get too angry. You don't want to add the rum before the syrup cooks because a lot of that goodness would cook off, and you really want to have this pack a real rum punch. And then just a teaspoon of vanilla. All right, the rum syrup is ready. So now I'll get the cake ready. First thing I'll do is turn the cake out onto a rack. And I hope it came out. Ooh, it sounds promising. Get the rack down and take a look. That's when you're glad you have thoroughly greased and floured the pan. So I've got a wooden skewer, and I want the cake to be able to really soak up a lot of this syrup. So I'm just going all around the cake just to give that rum syrup plenty of places to go to. Okay, that looks great. Now, this is a cool trick. Rather than try to pour the syrup on the cake while it's on the rack, I'm gonna pour half of the syrup into the Bundt pan, give or take. And then, you guessed it, I'm gonna put the cake back into the pan. Just wanna make sure I line up the grooves. And then, oh my gosh, that syrup is just completely enveloping the cake. And we can't forget about the bottom of the cake. So you want to do the same thing with the wooden skewer. And then the rest of the syrup gets poured on top. Okay, now the cake needs to soak up the rum, and that's going to take an hour. Now, aside from actually eating the cake, turning it out onto the cake stand is the best part. So I'll turn it over. And hopefully all of that syrup has been soaked into the cake. You can't imagine how sticky and delicious this is. My friends are gonna love me this year. I cut everyone a generous slice. I mean, it's Thanksgiving after all. Then it was all about the cream, which is just a cup of heavy cream whipped with a teaspoon of maple syrup. And I finished it with a sprinkle of pumpkin pie spice for some Thanksgiving magic.
I'm making one of our favorite recipes, pumpkin pie, which is rich and custardy and has incredible depth of flavor because I make a cooked filling and then I put it into a pie crust and bake and decorate with fresh whipped cream. So to start, I'll take my 1 can of pumpkin and I'm gonna add it to a saucepan. I'm gonna add 1/3 cup each of granulated sugar and brown sugar, and 1/4 cup of maple syrup for my 3rd type of sugar, and that's just gonna mean more dimension of flavor. I'll season with a teaspoon of salt, and now I'm gonna cook this stirring until it's glossy and thickened, and that's gonna allow the sugars to melt and caramelize. This is smelling really good. I'm gonna grab my heavy cream and milk. I'll add 3/4 cup of each of these. And one thing that I find so uniquely delicious about this pie is that you can actually taste the milky richness of it. And I'm using the combo so that it's really rich, but not overly rich. I'm gonna switch to a whisk now so I can whisk it all in. And now I'm just gonna heat this until the milk gets steamy. I don't wanna bring it to a boil and scald the milk. This is looking so creamy already. As this heats up, I'm gonna crack in my eggs. I've got 3 whole eggs and 2 egg yolks for added richness. So now anytime you want to incorporate eggs into a hot mixture like this, you've got to temper them, and that means warming them up gradually. Because if I were to just crack them in, they would scramble and the texture would not be smooth. I'm gonna grab a ladle. This always takes some coordination, but I'm gonna add a little bit of the hot mixture as I'm whisking the eggs. And this is essentially gonna gradually cook them while maintaining their smooth texture. My egg mixture is warm to the touch, and that's how I know it's ready to be added back into the pot. So with one hand, I'll drizzle it in, and with the other hand, I'm gonna continue to whisk. Perfect. I'm gonna continue to cook this while it thickens, and in the meantime, I'll grab my spices. I've got cinnamon and nutmeg, and pulling out the fancy vanilla beans. Oh, they smell so good. So I'm gonna slice it in half and just scrape out the pods. And I'm gonna use the blunt end of my knife to scrape them out. And this is gonna add fancy vanilla flavor and really pretty speckles. Okay, I'll scrape this into the filling. A little really goes a long way. And then I don't like to add too many spices, just enough to enhance the pumpkin flavor. So half a teaspoon of cinnamon and a quarter teaspoon of freshly grated nutmeg. I'll whisk this in. I love being able to see the speckles of the spices and the vanilla bean. My filling is done. I'll grab my crust, which is blind baking in the oven. This is just my go-to pie crust. Flour, sugar, and salt, blended with cold butter, and then formed into a dough with a little apple cider vinegar and ice water. I rolled it out and crimped the edges. This is beautiful. I'm gonna taste the filling before I add it in, just in case I wanna make any adjustments. Yum. There are so many things going on in that filling, and they all just mesh together in the most beautiful way. I'm gonna pour this into the crust, and I'm gonna bake this at 375 degrees for 30 to 40 minutes until the outside is set, but the center is still a little jiggly. That's how you prevent it from cracking. Oh yes, this is perfectly done. It's set around the outside, but it's still a little soft on the inside. I'm gonna let this cool completely, decorate with fresh whipped cream and cinnamon, and then it is gonna be the sweet star of the show.
I'm ready to tackle the next item on my Thanksgiving checklist, pumpkin ginger snap cheesecake. I'm just gonna make the crust first. I've got a package of ginger snaps, and I'm gonna let the food processor grind them up. I want to get them really fine. Okay, the crumbs look perfect. Oh, I love the smell of ginger snaps. I'll add some brown sugar and some chopped pecans. I chopped them pretty fine. And a dash of salt. There's a lot of sweetness in here. I'll just stir this together and mix it up. To bring the crust all together, I'll drizzle in some melted butter. This is about 6 tablespoons of butter, not too much. You just want enough to make the crumbs come together. All right, the crumbs look delicious. So I'll just dump them into a springform pan. And then I'll just use my fingers to press it into the bottom of the pan. And I want to bring the crumbs up along the sides of the pan by about 1/2 inch. Before I pour the filling into the crust, I'm just gonna chill it for about 30 minutes. So while the crust chills, I'm gonna go whip up the delicious filling. So I'm just gonna get a whole bunch of cream cheese into the mixer and beat it until it's soft, scraping the bowl once. I'll add a can of pumpkin puree and mix that in, scraping it again. Then I'll add 3 eggs, one at a time. That's the first, the second, and the third. Okay, now it's in with sour cream. And next, with the mixer on low, I'm gonna add sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, and vanilla. I'll really scrape the bowl before giving it all one final mix. Okay, that's done. Ready for the next step. The crust should be all set. Yep, looks good. Now I'm just gonna pour this luscious filling right in. This stuff is divine, delightful, all the adjectives that begin with D that I can think of. I'll just spread this into a single layer. Lad dropped me off, and he actually has to go back out there and work a little bit. I'm sure he won't get as much done without me helping him, but he'll get by. All right, the cheesecake just needs to go into a 350-degree oven for about 50 minutes. Now, while the cheesecake bakes, I'm gonna whip up a delicious salted caramel sauce to drizzle over the top. Not only is it yummy on the cheesecake, but it's also good to drizzle over all the other pies that people are bringing. It's so easy to whip up. Here goes. I just get some butter into a pan, along with brown sugar, heavy cream, vanilla, and some salt. Then I'll gently whisk it for 5 minutes or so, just until it thickens. Now I'll just get the sauce into a jar. Oh, look at that sauce. So thick and rich. Dessert tomorrow can't come soon enough for me. Now, this is the moment that the cheesecake gets freed from its pan. I put it on a cake stand and it goes on the island. And let's just pause for one small second for a dessert fantasy.
Let's get going on to our pumpkin latte. I'm making a brown sugar simple syrup. So it's white sugar, brown sugar, and some water, kind of equal parts. And then I always use the canned pumpkin. You know, pumpkin is squash, so this is just basically poached squash. It's cooked. It's always consistent, and actually, it's a very good product. One of the things that I always say about pumpkin doesn't really have a lot of flavor. It's the spices that we think of as the pumpkin flavor. That's why they call things pumpkin spice. You see pumpkin spice everything these days. I did a TV segment once. I asked people what pumpkin tastes like. Just like kind of man on the street kind of thing. Like, I mean, I'll ask you, what does pumpkin taste like? You're gonna tell me it tastes like cinnamon and nutmeg and ginger and all those pumpkin spices. But pumpkin itself has very little flavor. So you really need to pump up the flavor of pumpkin with those spices and things that are sweet like maple syrup and honey. And pumpkin is sort of like, it's almost like a vehicle for flavor. I'm gonna start by using about 1/3 of a cup of our pumpkin in here. We're gonna take our pumpkin spice. This is a combination of ingredients like cinnamon, nutmeg, ginger, maybe a little bit of allspice. If you wanna make your own pumpkin spice, you know, be my guest, but you know, now there's so many good quality spice blends like pumpkin spice, so you might as well just use it. So we're gonna put a little bit of that spice in there. So we're just gonna let the moisture from the pumpkin heat up a little bit and actually open up the oils of all those spices in there, just to kind of bring out the flavors. Now, I don't know about you, but I like to eat pumpkin during the season of pumpkin. You know, as soon as the summer's over, you start seeing the pumpkins go on the side of the road, and then you'll start seeing like the pumpkin spice lattes in your local coffee shop. There's pumpkin in basically every single thing. If you're making it, somebody's doing a pumpkin version of it somewhere. So we're just gonna kind of stir this, and we're not gonna bring it to a boil. We don't want it to get cloudy. We're just gonna let the brown sugar simple syrup, the pumpkin, and the pumpkin spices just kind of hang out together, and then we'll strain it out. So for the pumpkin spice latte, I'm gonna add a little bit of vanilla extract, and I'm gonna strain this out. I wanna strain out basically the pumpkin. If you don't have cheesecloth, which I'm using here, a really fine strainer will work just as well. And then you just wanna, like, very gently push it through. So basically, you're just getting pumpkin spice syrup. So this will keep for a very long time because there's lots of sugar that will preserve it. And you can use this syrup over ice cream. I think it will work really well. You can put it in your, of course, your coffee or your tea. And you can also use this on the, like yogurt or even like the parfaits that we're gonna be making later. With the granola, with the yogurt, a little bit more of the syrup. We're gonna put this in the refrigerator and let it cool. I'll be honest, I love making espresso like this. I mean, it's kind of cool. You don't need some expensive espresso machine. Put some water in the bottom. And then we're gonna just pack in the espresso. My feeling is if you're gonna drink coffee, you wanna taste it. You wanna feel it. Screw the top on, and just put it on the fire. And I need to froth some milk. So all we do for this, we're gonna scald the milk, and then these 3 ingredients, pumpkin spice syrup, the espresso, and the frothy milk, that's gonna make our latte. Latte time. I'm gonna pour some of our scalded milk into our frother. Pump some air into it, gets it nice and light and frothy, which is exactly what you want. So we're gonna start by putting a little bit of the pumpkin syrup in the bottom, some of our espresso, and now some frothy milk. Looks good. Look at that, pumpkin spice latte. You know what the key to this is? You want it to taste like latte or espresso with just a hint of the pumpkin spice running through it, that's all. You don't want it to be overbearing. You just want it to smell like Thanksgiving, and that's the key, and that's what this does.
So the first thing I need is a cup of half and half. I'm just gonna pour it into a bowl, set over a pan of hot water. I'm just gonna turn the heat on. I just want to make sure that the bowl actually is just sitting in it. It's not touching the water, and so it just steams. Otherwise, the mixture's going to get too hot. So the next thing I need is a can of pumpkin puree. It's a 29-ounce can. I'm just going to put it right in. And now I need 1.5 teaspoons of salt. And then some classic pumpkin spices, a teaspoon of cinnamon, half a teaspoon of nutmeg, and 2 cups of brown sugar. I'm just gonna heat it for about 4 to 5 minutes until it gets warm to the touch. And then I'm gonna add some egg yolks and make a custard. Just to make sure the egg yolks don't curdle, I'm gonna warm them a little bit with some of the warm mixture. Just put a little of the warm mixture in, mix it in. What it's called is tempering. Just bring the egg yolks up a little bit in temperature. And then whisk it right back into the mixture. And then I'm gonna cook it for about 3 or 4 minutes until the mixture starts to thicken the way custard would. Great, okay. Next I need some gelatin. So I need 1/2 cup of cold water. So it's 2 packets. Just stir it in. So 2 ripe bananas, make sure they're ripe. Just mash them on the board. They have such layered flavors. A little bit of molasses from the brown sugar, the banana. We're gonna put some orange zest in. One of the other good things about this is you can make it way in advance. Really, 3 or 4 days is just fine. Okay, that's really well mashed. So I'm just gonna put this into the warm pumpkin mixture. Ooh, good and messy. 1 teaspoon of grated orange zest. Okay, so that's about a teaspoon right in. And it looks like the egg yolks have really thickened the pumpkin mixture. You can add the softened gelatin right into the pumpkin. Just whisk it in. Take it off the heat and let it cool. And I'm gonna whip up 2 cups of heavy cream. I'm gonna put some of it in the mousse and some of it for the decoration. 1/2 cup of sugar. Splash of vanilla. Just gonna turn on and whip it. And then I'm gonna mix 1/2 of it back into the pumpkin mixture and the other 1/2 I'm gonna put into a piping bag. And I always like a nice big piping bag with a star tip like that. Okay. Cream's done. Just want it really firm, but not over whipped. Just take a spatula and fold it in. This is sort of classic folding technique. Have the spatula go right down the middle. Just do it very carefully. Okay, that's good. So now I'm just gonna pour it into a mold. Just pour it right in. This is enough mousse for about 8 people. Fill it with whipped cream. Really, all you want to do is just press evenly on the bag and just keep rolling it around in a circle. Try it out on the board, test whatever you like. It looks difficult, and believe me, it's not. Okay, and you always want to have some pumpkin showing in the middle. And since there's orange in it, I think I'll do a little orange zest decoration. Just gives it a little other texture and it gives people a hint of what's inside. How's that? Perfect, easy pumpkin mousse. And they'll always remember what you serve for dessert. Who's ready for pumpkin mousse?
Let me tell you about those pumpkin cinnamon rolls. They are amazing. First, I made the dough. I just put some milk in a saucepan with vegetable oil and sugar. Then I stirred it together and heated it up until it was really hot but not quite boiling. Then I removed the pan from the heat and let it cool a bit. Then I sprinkled on some active dry yeast and let it sit for about 5 minutes. Then I stirred in pumpkin puree and just let it sit. Then it was on to the dry ingredients. Now, in a separate bowl, I added flour, ground cinnamon, ground nutmeg, and ground ginger. Then I stirred it all together and sprinkled it into the saucepan. When everything was all stirred together, I covered the saucepan with a towel and set it aside in a warm place to rise for about an hour. And when it was all risen, it was time to move on to stage 2. Oh, look at that dough. It is so bubbly and puffy. It pretty much doubled in size. Now I'm just gonna finish it off and add half a cup of more flour, a generous half teaspoon of baking powder, a scant half teaspoon of baking soda, and half a teaspoon of salt. And then I'll just stir this addition of the dry ingredients into this puffy dough. Without this final addition of flour, the dough would be way too sticky. So it's nice to give it a chance to rise and then finish it off with just a little more flour. Okay, I've got it pressed into a rough rectangle shape. I'll give it one more sprinkle of flour, and then I'll use the rolling pin to roll it into a nice big rectangle. Now I have a stick of melted butter, and I'll just drizzle it all over the dough. It's all covered in melted butter. So now I need to sprinkle on the sugar and spice. And boy, is it nice. It's just white sugar, brown sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, and ground ginger, all mixed together. Okay, now this just gets sprinkled all over the butter. I want to do it in a nice, even coating. Okay, now I have a whole bunch of finely chopped pecans, and I'll just sprinkle those all over. Okay, so now it's just about rolling them up. I use a bit of a typewriter motion, going back and forth with my fingers, rolling the dough toward me tightly so it's nice and neat. The seam gets pinched closed, and the trick is to turn the roll over so the seam is facing down. Then it gets cut into half-inch slices, which go into buttered pans. This amount of dough makes 3 pans, 2 for Pastor Ken and 1 for my family. Then after the rolls have risen for about 20 minutes, it's time to bake them. They go into a 375-degree oven for 15 to 18 minutes. While the rolls finish baking, I'm gonna make a delicious frosting to go over the top. Now it starts with 8 ounces of cream cheese. Now along with the cream cheese, it's powdered sugar, whole milk, melted butter, a pinch of salt, and it all gets beaten together until it's nice and smooth. I always like to ice cinnamon rolls right when they come out of the oven. When they're nice and warm, they just suck up all that beautiful, beautiful icing. I'll get a big blob right in the middle of each one. Oh, that was a mighty big blob right there. It does look like a lot of icing, but as the rolls sit, it's gonna settle down into the crevices. Oh, man. Now I'll just grab some of the chopped pecans and sprinkle them all over the frosting. All right, that's 1 pan for my family, 2 for Pastor Ken. I predict he is gonna love these.
So the first thing is half a cup of half and half. And I'm gonna put it into a double boiler. And the next thing is 1 15-ounce can of pumpkin puree. I've done this with cooking a pumpkin and pureeing it, or a can of pumpkin puree, and believe me, you can't tell the difference. And I can tell you which one's easier. Okay, so that's in. Next ingredient is 1 cup of brown sugar. And you want this sort of lightly packed. It's how brown sugar is generally measured. Right into the pumpkin. 3/4 teaspoon of salt. Half a teaspoon of cinnamon. And 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg. So now I'm gonna make the custard. So I've got 2 egg yolks, and what I wanna do is I wanna warm up the egg yolks a little bit with a pumpkin mixture so I don't end up with scrambled eggs. Just like making a traditional custard. And then pour the whole thing back into the hot pumpkin mixture. See, a nice scraper. Just wanna get all of it. And just mix that up. And just cook that for about 4 or 5 minutes. So I'm gonna take 1 package of gelatin and just soften it in 1/4 cup of cold water. When it's chilled, the egg yolks are gonna help the mousse to set, but the gelatin's gonna help it too. Okay, off the heat. I'm just gonna add these other ingredients. Mashed bananas. And softened gelatin. And the last thing is orange zest. Okay, I'm just gonna stir this up. So while that cools, I'm gonna whip the cream. So put the whipped cream right in the middle. And then with a spatula, I use a rubber spatula, just go straight down through the middle and then fold it over that way. Straight down through the middle and then right to the bottom of the bowl and then fold it over. Just keep doing that until it's really well mixed. It smells great. And the good news about this is you can make it in advance. Leave it in the fridge for a day and then decorate it just before you're gonna serve it. Doesn't look half bad, does it? My experience is nobody remembers what they had for dinner, but they always remember dessert.